Well, welcome everyone to our Steadyhand Cafe, the second of a two-part series discussing the preparation for and ultimately living in retirement. We're delighted to also welcome Karin Mizgala and Jason Heath, two of Canada's leading advice-only financial planners. Karin co-founded Money Coaches Canada 12 years ago, and Jason founded Objective Financial Partners just over 10 years ago. They were early pioneers in developing the fee-for-service planning model. Karin and Jason's firms are giving Canadians an important different option for accessing financial advice. Because they don't sell insurance, investments, or other products that typically pay the advisor a commission, they're unbeholden to an insurance company or an investment dealer for selling you something. Instead, they and their colleagues, as well as a growing community across Canada, are providing unbiased, independent, and objective knowledge and advice. We'll hear a little bit more about this as Karin and Jason introduce themselves shortly. Having completed our first cafe in January, we had a lot of follow-up questions on estate planning, gifting to children, corporate holding companies, and all sorts of complex issues. So I think we already have our next cafe topic on the books. Subject to your feedback in the survey immediately following the webinar, my sense is that our fall cafe will focus on estate planning. Today, we're going to focus on some of the top worries on the minds of Karin and Jason's clients and some practical ideas and tips around general planning for retirement. As context for today's discussion, as many of the people who've tuned into the webinar today already know, seniors in Canada are a rapidly growing segment of our population and are living longer and healthier lives than previous generations. With more than 5 million Canadians set to turn 65 this decade, the 2020s will indeed be the decade where many of the so-called baby boomer generation head off to retirement. That's a lot of people planning for and beginning to live in retirement. Indeed, RBC reported in 2019 that according to Stats Canada, every week almost 5,000 baby boomers are retiring. It adds up to more than 250,000 retirements each year. That's akin to the entire population of Saskatoon exiting the workforce every year. Additionally, and here's some really good news, by 2036, the average life expectancy at birth for women will rise an additional 2 years to 86 years, and for men an additional 3 years to 83 years. So lots more boomers retiring and living longer. Great news all around. It's time to get started with our dive into financial planning for and living in retirement. Again, welcome Karin and Jason. We'd love it if you could kick things off by introducing yourselves, tell us a little bit about how you became an advice-only planner, and a little bit about your client base and what brings people to you, and indeed, how do they find you? And Karin, since you started Money Coaches Canada 12 years ago, preempting Jason's entry into this market by 2 years, why don't we start with you?
All right, well, thanks so much, David. So I'll just start a few years before that. I started my career in banking right out of university. And at that time, as a woman with an MBA, which was pretty rare back then, I was fairly quickly promoted to a branch manager at the TD Bank branch in Toronto. And however, it didn't take me too much time to realize that I wasn't really a Bay Street banker type. And I then moved to gentler, kinder Vancouver, where I finished my CFP and started working with a smaller financial planning firm where I did comprehensive planning, but I was also licensed to sell mutual funds and insurance. I also had an undergrad degree in psychology and have always really been looking to balance my interest in helping people with my business background. So while I'm pretty good at crunching the numbers, what I really loved about what I was doing was the planning and the coaching part of personal finances. And I really got to know that that was the area that clients derive the most value from. Certainly the numbers are important, but helping people make good life and financial decisions so they can live comfortable, balanced, and meaningful lives is really what it's all about. The numbers and the plan are simply the tools. And as my career progressed, I felt more and more strongly that planning advice should be separate from product implementation. I mean, product and investments and insurance are important, but I really wanted my advice to be as unbiased as possible and my compensation to be neutral when whether a client paid down their mortgage or invested in the stock market. So that's really what led me initially to put out a shingle as an advice-only financial coach. Jason wasn't around. There weren't very many other options in terms of firms that offered a space for an advice-only financial planner or financial coach. So a couple of years later, in 2010, as you mentioned, I co-founded Money Coaches Canada, which is now a national network of 17 advice-only planners and paraplanners. I co-founded with my business partner, Sheila Walkington. And typically our clients, you asked who finds us and who we typically work with. So most of our clients are looking for guidance to either ensure they're on the right track with their money. They have a sense that they're okay. They've been putting money into RSPs. They have insurance. They have kids, RESPs and so on. But as they're embarking on a transition to retirement, they're just not confident that they have all of the pieces hanging together. And so often they're coming to us looking for, to crunch some numbers, to get a bit more specific in terms of the whens and hows they can retire, and just to really, in some cases, validate that they're on the right track. We have another group of clients that aren't quite as in much control of their money, but they do want to change that. So I would say the bulk of our clients are between 45 and 70 years old, and at least 70% of them are looking for retirement planning. Some are looking just for retirement planning. They're really at the sort of cusp of retirement, but others, younger folks who are getting organized early, they also are looking for general financial planning, but they're also looking with an eye to making sure they're well positioned for retirement. And clients, they find us through all sorts of different methods, but I would say the biggest one is Google searches that lead us to our website. Also media, we're often quoted in the Globe and Mail and some of the other financial papers with a good team of coaches that media can reach. Social media, and really word of mouth from friends, family, and other professionals like accountants and investment people like you, David Toyne at Steadyhand.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Karin. And you guys do have a fantastic public presence. You've got a very a fantastic blog that is very digestible. And so if anybody has interest in hitting your website, moneycoaches.com, sign up for the blog, I think you'd be well informed. And speaking of public presence, we have our own media guru here in Jason Heath. Jason is regularly quoted in so many different newspapers, and Jason, you are regularly contributing to, I guess, Money Sense. Is the Financial Post your primary sort of national distribution?
That's right. Yep.
So I suspect a number of people on the webinar today have at least heard your name, if not read a lot of your stuff.
Sure. Yeah, look, thanks so much for having me, David. I wish I could say I've got a compelling story about how, I always wanted to be a financial planner as a little boy or went on my way to get to this point in my career. But to be honest, it was kind of luck and hard work along the way. Like Karin, I started working at a bank, TD as well. And to be honest, I was really sort of unhappy, disillusioned, I think, with the mainstream financial industry. And it was sort of random. I was at my mother's house one day and the local newspaper was sitting on the coffee table, and I picked it up and I was flipping through back when help wanted ads used to be in newspapers. And I saw an ad for a fee-only financial planning firm, and I liked financial planning. I still like financial planning. And so I applied, and I don't think I really understood what made a fee-only financial planning firm unique. It took a while of working there to really sort of understand the difference. And I worked there for 10 years, learned a lot. And then 10 years ago, I started my own company. So here I am 20 years later. So it definitely wasn't intentional that I became a fee-only, advice-only financial planner, but it's been very intentional that I have stayed one and avoided the temptation to sell financial products like investments or insurance. You'd asked about demographics of the clients that we work with. I'd say there's no limitations really in terms of income or assets or anything like that. So we differ from sort of typical financial advisors that might have a minimum investment, for example, that might be required. We work with a lot of clients in other parts of Canada, even other parts of the world. So location doesn't matter. And I think it matters that much less now that people are so much more comfortable using Zoom and meeting remotely. I'd say we've got a disproportionate number of clients who are business owners, a lot of incorporated professionals like doctors in particular, but we've got clients who are in their 20s, we've got clients in their 80s, sort of every age and stage in between. I can say over the last 20 years, I've definitely noticed a trend towards younger clients. It used to be most of my clients were in their 50s, sort of pre-retirement. And, you know, I think more and more young people in particular are taking interest in financial planning. Retirement is a big focus, whether somebody's 40 years away from retirement or well into it, because I think the concepts of accumulation and decumulation and tax and investment planning are quite similar. And what brings people to us, you know, having done this for the last 20 years, I've worked with thousands of clients, so just referrals from existing clients, from other professionals like accountants and lawyers and investment advisors. As mentioned, I'm pretty active in the media, writing for the Financial Post and Money Sense. I think I've written over 600 articles over the last 10 years, and just started recording season 2 of a podcast called Millennial Money with Evie Kwong at the Toronto Star, and do a lot of other media stuff as well. So the media in particular has given me a great opportunity and a voice within the financial community, and it's something I don't take for granted.
Fabulous. Well, again, congratulations on your roles as pioneers in this this advice-only planning community, which by my measure in the last 5 years is just accelerating in terms of its momentum. And I think the future is very, very bright for what it is you guys do. And thank you again for taking time out today to give us your practical perspectives and benefit from your experience. We have 3 polls that we're going to run. We've had over 450 people register for this webinar today, so we've got lots of really interesting perspectives out there that are going to feed into our polls and help inform some of our future comments. So Lisa, if we could ask you to run the first poll, what is the most intimidating part of retirement planning? And hopefully it's fairly intuitive how to complete your answers to this poll on the GoToWebinar platform. Lisa, are you seeing some results? I'm a little bit blind in terms of what's happening here.
Yep, about 30% of people have voted.
Okay, fantastic. Well, we'll just give it a few more seconds. I think if we could kind of get to about 75 or 80% of respondents, that would give us some good insights.
We are almost at 80.
Oh, perfect. Well, why don't we cut it off and see what everybody has to say. What is the most intimidating part of retirement planning? Okay, so almost half are worried about that sort of decumulation strategy, when to kick into your pensions and how best to draw down investments. A quarter not saving enough. Nobody's worried about having too much free time.
Go figure.
Well, maybe everybody probably took to heart Don Ezra's comments in the first cafe, where he talked extensively about really planning for and preparing for what will you be doing and with whom you'll be doing it in life after paid work. So everybody's they've got that all sort of squared away. Any reaction to those poll results from either of you?
Yeah, I mean, decumulation's tricky. It used to be easy when, people got a job when they were 18 and they worked for 35 years with a company and got a defined benefit pension payment in retirement. It's, so many more people are self-employed or not covered by pensions, and it's trickier to try to, develop and make decisions about a retirement income these days for sure. So decumulation doesn't surprise me.
It doesn't surprise me. However, I wouldn't necessarily have thought that that was the biggest worry or the most intimidating part, perhaps. Although I guess that's fair enough because, you know, in terms of
Saving enough.
Yeah, I find that the question about just am I going to have enough is a big driver to you know, to our doorsteps, to you know, to check in and see if they're going to be in a position where there's a bag lady syndrome for women. I don't know if there's quite the same equivalent for men, but actually I do think I had one bag man, but it's a bit rare. But just that concern that you're going to be dependent on your kids, or you know, you're going to be just in a position not to be able to take care of yourself throughout, you know, our hopefully longer and longer lifespans.
Okay, well, we're gonna delve into that decumulation issue in a couple of moments, but why don't we just sort of flesh out some of the top retirement-related worries that your clients share with you, so that everybody on this webinar can have a sense as to whether there are other worries that they should be worried about, or perhaps, no, I guess I'm not alone.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think running out of money for sure is a worry. You know, I find it's really interesting. It almost doesn't matter how much money you have or how old you are. It seems like everybody gets nervous. And I've seen people even who, you know, have this sort of notional dollar amount, you know, for their investment account or something. And if their investments dip below that dollar amount, it makes them uncomfortable. I think it's tough when you've been a saver your whole life and all of a sudden you need to dis-save and you need to draw that down. But I find a lot of people are even just worried about making good decisions about money. Am I making the right decisions? Am I doing the right things? And, you know, right depends on who you are. There's no one right way to accumulate or decumulate your assets or invest your money. So I think, you know, the nature of retirement planning is definitely very personalized.
For sure. Karin, any thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I certainly agree with all of what Jason just had to say. And I think for a lot of people, the transition to that drawing out of your portfolio versus having money come into your bank account from, you know, your employer is a huge psychological transition. And you know, any kind of transition typically brings up a lot of fears and insecurities, whether they're warranted or not. And so just that lack of confidence going into this next phase of what it's going to look like, how I'm going to feel about it, what's my relationship to money going to be, what's my relationship to my spouse going to be at that point too? Are they going to be driving me crazy? I'm going to get a divorce. I'm going to, you know, like there's a whole host of things, some financial, some personal, and they all kind of get intermingled into this place of, yikes, I just don't know what it's going to be like. And so, and there's less control, a sense that I'm not going to be able to control things as much. I'm going to be more dependent on the markets. And so fears of market downturns and how that's going to impact a portfolio, and just aging, what it's going to be like as I get older, the costs of healthcare, the costs of long-term care and retirement living, you know, assisted living. There's so many uncertainties that it can be pretty overwhelming going into, you know, this next phase. Well, certainly fun and exciting, thinking, oh, I don't have to work any longer. But I think for a lot of people, it's a time of a huge amount of stress and uncertainty.
Okay, so with that as a backdrop, why don't we run our second poll, which is how much do you think you will need in your investment accounts to retire comfortably? And Lisa, do you want to just give us a little bit of reveal on how far along we are?
About 70%.
Okay. Well, again, when we hit about 80 or so, you can cut it off.
Almost at 80.
Okay. Well, I guess the good news here is a modest minority, 10%, are somewhat discouraged, more than I'll ever have. But wow, do those numbers surprise you based upon your practice experience?
Everybody's so different, every situation's so different. So I think that's the thing, the magic number can be, very different depending who you ask the question.
Yeah. So Jason, seeing that and knowing what you know about working with clients, how should people be thinking about the amount of money that they're going to need in retirement? Where do you start thinking about that? And frankly, when do you know if you're finished, if in fact you ever are?
Yeah. Well, the one thing I'll say is I find it's kind of like a math formula, but the numbers are forever changing. So it's not like algebra where you solve for X and there's only one answer. Like if you have $1 million, you can retire. It's based on your age at retirement. Big difference retiring at 55 versus 70, obviously. And your retirement age may not be the age that you plan to or want to retire. If you get an early, severance package that you're not expecting, or your business runs into difficulty, or a pandemic hits, life expectancy as well, which can vary significantly and can change, obviously, and it's impossible to know with certainty. I think if we knew how long we would live, it would be a lot easier to plan our retirement, but I'm kind of happy not knowing that. Investment returns, which are unpredictable. We've seen that, over the last couple of years, whether you plan to downsize, whether you expect an inheritance. So there's a bunch of factors that are going to impact what the magic number is for a particular individual, but the big determinant is spending. So $1 million is a lot of money when you spend $25,000 per year, but not if you spend $125,000 per year. So I think, spending is probably, in my opinion, the most important input when you're trying to figure out how much money you need for retirement. And, Karin and I and our colleagues in the advice only and retirement planning community, we use retirement planning software to try to look at different scenarios and determine guidelines, but it's ultimately, our best guess, holding a bunch of factors constant that are forever changing. But the whole practice of retirement planning, I think, can help give you a sense of the degree to which you're on track. How much do you need to save every month? How much can you afford to comfortably spend in retirement? And it's good peace of mind, but life is forever changing, and all the variables that impact the retirement planning that we do.
And when you engage in this conversation with clients, are they prepared for this kind of a conversation? Like, do they have a sense of how their spending might be different in retirement than it is today? Or are these like serious aha kind of conversations and moments?
It's a good question. I find that if you were to ask 10 people to guess how much money they spend, most of them would underestimate how much money they spend. You can get someone to fill out a questionnaire. It says, this is how much I spend on food and entertainment and, this and that. I kind of like working backwards. What's your income? How much are you saving? How much are you paying on your mortgage payments, for example? You can kind of work backwards and figure out what someone's, lifestyle expenses are. And those expenses, your course or living expenses, may not change significantly going into retirement. Saving and, costs for your kids and debt and those things might disappear, but the amount of money you spend on food and clothing and, utilities, and that's not likely to change. Some people might, go from 2 cars down to 1, but some might start traveling more than they were previously. So, everyone's a little bit different, and I think it's really important to identify current spending and try to do your best to identify how your personal spending might change going into retirement, because everyone's different.
Yeah. And Karin, in your experience, is there much of a difference when someone is, married or partnered versus somebody who's single around this issue?
The issue of spending, or just the issue of retirement planning going into?
Yeah, like thinking about how much money you're going to need going forward, because part of it is obviously source of income, or like whether that's coming from pensions, and also some of it is, as Jason's talking about, the spending side of it.
Yeah, I completely agree with what Jason said around the importance of having an understanding of your cash flow now, so that then you can be prepared for how you're going to adapt to, in most cases, a reduced income, even if you've got a significant amount in your portfolio. I mean, generally speaking, it's less than what we had when we're working. So, and also to the point of knowing, having an idea of what you spend, I think most people do underestimate. And as a single person, it might actually be a little bit easier to determine what you're spending, because you're not trying to second guess what your husband or your wife is doing. You have a little more control over your life, over your choices, over your goals. So I think that part of the planning process can actually be easier for, for a financial planner to work with a single person. There's a whole host of other issues that may be a bit more challenging for a single person, in terms of, you don't have a brainstorm partner, you don't have an accountability partner to kind of keep the checks and balances in place, prior to and moving into retirement. So, I think for a single person, the importance of having somebody to talk about, your goals, and to, whether it's a professional, whether it's an accountability partner, friend, family member, or so on, and to have a good support team around a single person. I mean, I think it's important for a couple as well too, because sometimes you need somebody that can help manage that discussion around that. What does retirement look like? I have lots of clients that come into the planning process, and we'll talk about what your goals and objectives are, and one person will say, really, that's what you want? I mean, people are so busy, they don't have time to sit down and create the space to have some of these conversations. So for a single person, you want somebody that you can talk out loud, like, what does this next stage look like? And to really pay attention to the spending piece, and to have good control, good cash management system in place before you go into retirement, when all of those, as I was mentioning before, the psychological issues come into place, the relational issues come into place, the social issues come into place. You want to have a sense of some control, and cash flow is a place you can control. It's harder to control what the markets are going to do, or, like Jason said, pandemics and health issues. There's so many things that are uncontrollable, but the one thing we do have control over is cash flow.
Mm-hmm.
You make a really good point about it's simpler, it's more controllable if it's a single individual as opposed to a partnership, couples. I've had the pleasure of being across the kitchen table from many of our clients, and I've been really pleasantly surprised to see often it's the female partner who's taking the control over the finances, but equally there's many situations where it's the male partner. But in this situation, how it's so important that you get both partners engaged in this discussion. Are there any sort of engagement mandates or tips that you use to give sort of the financially dominant partner to be able to bring along the less sort of engaged partner?
Good question. I mean, I have to say I've noticed, particularly with younger clients, more women taking the lead. I think it's better to the extent both partners can come to the table and they might bring different discussion points and they might have different levels of understanding of, the family finances. It's tricky though. Karin, I'm sure you may find the same thing. There may be some couples you work with where you work primarily with one spouse versus the other, and you're hoping things are getting filled in, or you can at least copy somebody on an email or whatnot. But every couple sort of manages their delegation of responsibilities differently, whether it's money or otherwise. But definitely a benefit if both are involved, for sure.
One of the things that I think can help, if you're conscious that there's one person, as an advisor, if you're conscious that there's one person that tends to be more comfortable around the financial discussion, is to very much focus on the goals and objectives, and that needs to be the starting point of any financial plan anyways. But that way, male, female, person who's more involved with the actual details of running the money, it's sort of immaterial to this whole conversation of goals. And at the end of the day, that's really what it's all about, is like, how do you want to live? And then, the detail parts of, how do you structure the finances and so on. I do think it's nice if there is some balance, power balance in terms of just knowledge. But again, I think that's also the advisor and the financial planner can, part of our role is education, and to bring somebody along, and also to make the whole planning process and the numbers understandable. So even if somebody is not confident or comfortable in the area, we should be able to communicate the decisions that need to be made, the trade-offs that need to be made, the concerns in language that anyone can understand. That's really our something that we have to be good at doing, and otherwise we're not doing our job.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Totally agree. No jargon. We're going to get into some really specific issues around CPP, OAS deferrals and things like that, RRIF, RRSP conversions. But I did pose the question to Karin and Jason earlier about what are the top 3 mistakes that Canadians make when thinking about or living in retirement, just to sort of tease out some of their practice experience. So what are those top 3 mistakes that Canadians make? Karin, why don't we start with you?
Sure. So I think we've talked about a few of them here, and even though the poll didn't suggest that people were too worried about what they were going to do in retirement, I actually think having no life plan is huge. Often we do approach retirement with a focus on the financial piece, and okay, let's make sure we have enough money. Life is busy again. No time to have those conversations. So not enough attention being placed on what's our purpose going to be in retirement, and what's life going to look like. Some of the things we've already talked about. I always think about this client that we were engaged in the planning process, and I ran the numbers and said, okay, you're good, you're blessed, you're going to be fine in retirement in terms of the numbers that you wanted. And one of the clients burst into tears, and it was interesting because it was like, what was going on here? Like, on the one hand, I think she was relieved to know that they were going to be on it okay, but there was another part of her that I think it was like, a bird in a cage. The door was open, and it's like, oh my God, now what do I do? Like, my whole life has been about work and about achieving and about moving towards this, sort of utopia of retirement, and oh my God, it's here. So, I think that life plan piece, and really thinking about what is life going to look like, on the other side, and starting to, if you're mostly work focused and you don't have a lot of hobbies or things like that, then you want to be thinking about those things well in advance of of that time. Not everybody's a golfer, David. So that's a big one.
Thank you. Jason, do you want to weigh in?
Yeah, I think that, my top three, one of them would definitely be not having a good sense of retirement readiness. And it's funny because I find the pendulum swings both ways. There are some people that are better off than they think they are, like Karin's example, and until they sit down, they don't realize what good financial shape they're in. There's going to be others that are on a bad trajectory, and I think the sooner you find that out, the better, because then you've got time to right the ship, so to speak. I think paying high investment fees is, definitely another one. There's a lot of people that are paying, 2 or 2.5 or even 3% on their investments, and there's lower cost options available, and especially in a low interest rate environment, there's a lot of conservative investors who are paying 2% or 2.5% in fees to earn 2 or 2.5% return, and there's nothing on a net basis. I think the other thing with young people in particular to look, people that are far from retirement who are thinking about it and planning for it. I find there's a lot of people that are very reliant, particularly, in Toronto and Vancouver and some of the big cities out there, very reliant on real estate growth and how that's going to somehow fund their retirement or justify the debt levels they're taking on. And sometimes the debt levels are so high that there's not cash flow left over for traditional retirement savings. And I hope that, these are people who will be able to downsize and pay off debt and, have some money to go towards retirement. But it can be a tricky strategy and a lot of variables involved there for sure.
Yeah, it's interesting. One of the granular issues that we often face with clients is taking money out of their RSPs for their first-time buyer down payments.
Yeah.
And just walking through the implications of that on their long-term retirement scenario from a financial perspective is quite interesting. Well, we're going to dive into some of the really practical, meaty things, including getting to that decumulation challenge, which is so top of mind with people. We're going to have, to launch into that, we're going to have our last poll. So Lisa, if you could pull up the poll, at what age do you plan to take CPP, the Canada Pension Plan?
We're at 60%.
Thank you.
Okay, almost at 80%, so I'll close that now.
This is going to be interesting. Wow.
Ah, an educated group.
Oh, well, we can just skip to the next question then.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Skip the next section.
Yeah. Oh, that's very interesting. You're right, Karin. It's an educated group for sure. I just wanted to sort of set up this this question for Jason, which is really, what are the things to think about in either deferring or taking CPP and OAS? If you read the Globe and Mail, you may have seen last week the tax and fiscal policy reporter Patrick Bethor wrote about this very issue. And in summary, he said few Canadian seniors are deferring retirement benefits when doing so could mean tens of thousands of extra dollars. And then he went through and actually explained from Statistics Canada how few people are actually waiting until 70, particularly for OAS. A few more people on CPP, but like it was less than 1% on OAS. So Jason, what's going on there, and what's your advice to Canadians about this issue?
Well, as far as what's going on there, I personally think there's two factors. One factor is when you're 64 and a half and you get a package in the mail from Service Canada and people sort of look through and think, okay, I guess I'm supposed to fill this thing out and start my pensions. I find part of it is just because of that prompt or that nudge that, oh, I got this, I might as well apply. I do think there's a lot of people who I talk to and, explore the benefits of deferring, where it's almost like I've paid into this thing for so long, I want to get my pension, or, I don't want to draw down my investments. So, I'm going to start my pension to protect my investments. But, the statistics as you alluded to, only about 1% of people defer to age 70. But when you run the numbers, depending on the assumptions that you use, if you live well into your 80s, you are generally better off deferring your CPP and old age security as late as age 70. For each month that you defer those pensions, they increase, so you get less years of payments, but you get higher payments. And the break even, again, tends to be into your 80s, depending on the assumptions that you use. And it's interesting, once somebody gets to age 65 in the first place, you mentioned, David, life expectancy, and typically the life expectancy we hear quoted right now for the average Canadian, I think, is about age 84. That's the age at which the average Canadian dies, which is brought down by people who die at a younger age. But once you make it to age 65 in the first place, there's about a 50% chance of a man living to age 89 and about a 50% chance of a woman living to age 91. So, the majority of people, in my opinion, should be deferring their CPP and old age security. I could spend a whole session on this, but I think some of the factors to consider when you look at deferring those pensions are, if you're a conservative investor, it's probably advantageous to defer or consider deferring those pensions. If you think you're going to have a long life expectancy based on your own health or based on your family history, women live longer than men as it is, so I think women in particular should be considering it. If you don't have other pension income, like you don't have another monthly pension that you're receiving, everybody wants these gold-plated, government inflation protected pensions. Well, that's what CPP and old age security are. So you can buy your own or increase your own, government guaranteed inflation protected pension simply by considering deferring those pensions as late as age 70.
Yeah, and the inflation protection is, OAS inflation.
Right now, especially.
Yeah. I used the website longevityillustrator.org, which Don Ezra introduced us to back in January, to find out my and my wife's, predicted longevity. And then I incorporated that into the Steadyhand planning tool, where we have a calculator that does, whether you should defer or not. And for me, the break even was 82. So if I make it past 82, which the longevity illustrator suggested I had a pretty good chance of doing, I was better to defer. So that just gave me the arguably mathematical rationale to do that.
Mm-hmm. Great.
Jason, can you give us a 40-second blurb on the OAS clawback? Because that is something that is top of mind for a lot of people that are in retirement.
For sure. So OAS, old age security, you can start as early as 65, as late as age 70. If your income exceeds approximately $80,000 per year, for every dollar your income exceeds $80,000, if you're an old age security recipient, your OAS gets reduced or gets taxed at 15 cents on the dollar. And your OAS generally gets fully clawed back at about $130,000 of income. This clawback is calculated on an annual basis. It's temporary. It's only for that given year that you have a high income. So you could have a one-time spike that causes this, recovery tax or clawback. People hate it, but at the end of the day, if you have a high enough income that you're running into OAS clawback, you're probably in a good position. There's strategies to avoid it, but something to be mindful of if you're collecting OAS.
Yeah, nobody seems to like the OAS clawback.
No.
Karin, the RRSP has a lifespan up until the age of 71. When in that year that you turn 71, you need to convert it to a RRIF, retirement income fund. And then in the following year, when you turn 72, you need to start to begin to draw out at a minimum and escalating level. But there are times when it makes sense for you to either start to draw down from your RRSP before it converts, or possibly even convert it prior to turning 71. Can you just give us a 101 on when you might want to do that?
Sure.
when you might want to take more than the minimum too.
Right. So, I mean, I think the conventional wisdom is that you defer paying tax as long as possible. So the idea of leaving money in the RSP until you absolutely have to convert it to a RRIF and then taking the minimum amount out is, you know, kind of ideal from a tax planning perspective. But there could be a few different reasons why it makes sense to take monies before, assuming you're retired before the age of, you know, 71, 72. And one of them would be you need the money. If that the most of your retirement assets that you're going to be converting to income are in a registered, you know, RSP plan, then and you're retiring at 65 and you only have the Canada Pension and Old Age Security, and you might even want to defer that to age 70, then it just may behoove you to, you know, to take money out of an RSP sooner and possibly even RRIF sooner than 65 because of some advantages in terms of pension income splitting and just, you know, the ease of creating a monthly income or a quarterly income from a stream of income from the registered assets. The other reason you might want to do it is if you're deferring your pensions, your government pensions, if you don't have any other pensions, and you want to smooth out your tax scenarios and the amount of tax that you pay over, you know, your retirement lifespan, it may make sense to draw sooner than 71 to bring yourself up to about a $50,000 taxable income is a good threshold to consider. So if you've got, you know, pension income's less or you're deferring such that there is no pension income, then you may want to consider drawing out of the registered assets, you know, well before the age 71. And again, these you know, these are calculations that, you know, that we do with our clients to look at, well, what if this scenario, what if that scenario, which scenario and drawdown process is going to ultimately leave you with more dollars in your pocket throughout your lifespan.
And I guess with the tax-free savings account being such a powerful way to build long-term wealth, even if you don't need the money from your RSP, if it makes sense from a tax perspective to take it down now and use some of that money into the TFSA. Yeah, cool. Okay. We're going to get to the decumulation issue in just one moment, but I thought it'd be worthwhile just quickly hearing, Karin, what are the assumptions that you use in that planning tool around things like mortality and inflation and investment returns and any other sort of, you know, key metrics that you might be using, and where do those assumptions come from? Are they sort of validated by some sort of external influence?
Yeah, great question. So right now, as far as mortality is concerned, I'm still mostly using age 95. Women, and I think we talked about this a little bit earlier, but women are living to sort of 84, 85, on average men 81. And, you know, and that's been increasing over the years. And so for some of my clients, especially if they seem to be very healthy in their, you know, in their 60s and so on, that I'm moving it to age 100, especially for women, because just because of the longevity. Inflation is an interesting one because, of course, you know, we're faced now with crazy levels of inflation that we haven't seen in a long, long time. And it's one that we're debating internally at Money Coaches Canada. Like, you know, we don't expect that these levels of inflation at 4 and 5% and so on are going to endure for the long term. And we're really trying to look at building assumptions that are long-term assumptions. So we have just recently bumped up to 2.5% for long-term inflation. And you know, we do look to the financial planning associations to, you know, to help us with guidelines that, you know, for inflation, for rates of return. They typically only publish once a year, so we're, you know, we also have to have these internal conversations and to come up with what we think make the most sense. Now, you know, we're also running multiple scenarios for our clients. And so, and I think Jason mentioned before, I mean, there's so many assumptions that we're putting in that we won't know until, you know, many years later, you know, which ones were, I mean, they're never going to be accurate. They're going to be reasonable and well thought through. But that's why I think it's really important for us to do multiple scenarios so that we can give clients a sense of, you know, sensitivity of, you know, if this happened, you know, at these rates of return or at this level of inflation or at this mortality age, that you're still going to be, you know, we're stress testing it to say that, you know, even if things don't go exactly as planned, we've kind of accounted for that and you're still going to be okay. In terms of the rates of return, typically 4 or 5%. Most of our clients and retirees have balanced portfolios through retirement, sort of 50 to 60% equities. And, you know, I mean, some depending on their risk tolerance and if they've got large pensions, they may have higher weightings in equities, in which, you know, perhaps we would bump up that rate of return a little bit. But I think, you know, we don't want to be too conservative, because if we were ultimately conservative on all of our assumptions, then nobody would ever be able to retire. But, you know, we want to also make sure that people don't fulfill that big fear of outliving their money, and making sure that there's, you know, there's some wiggle room for people. And the CPP and OAS, again, I think we've gravitated towards using age 70 for a lot of our clients. You know, again, as Jason said, there's a whole host of considerations depending on, you know, their health, on the rest of their financial situation. You know, there's some other reasons where we might, depending on the client, you know, run different scenarios with different assumptions. But I think the notion of leaving too much on the table here, as far as having a nice guaranteed portion of, you know, of your retirement income, is a pretty important one for most people.
Thank you. And speaking of retirement income, and I know it always depends, but we'd love to have your insights and perspectives on this issue of getting income to meet your lifestyle. And my notes say that saving for retirement is hard enough, but then we shift to depending upon our past behaviors and our success saving to now relying upon our investments to fund our lifestyle after paid work. It's so challenging, in fact, that Nobel Peace Prize winner and retired Stanford financial professor William Sharpe, who had a very important financial ratio named after him, called this issue of decumulation the nastiest, hardest problem in finance. And there's a lot of writing about this issue. So as you think about it and you're advising your clients around decumulation issues, can you give us some scenarios about how you might optimize investment drawdown between registered and non-registered accounts, and how do you factor in all sorts of other income streams, etc.? Just how do you think about this, and how do you guide and coach your clients through that? And Jason, why don't we start with you?
Well, you know, I often gravitate towards taking early RRSP withdrawals, especially if you're in a low tax bracket. Karin referenced, you know, $50,000 of income, depending the province that you're in, and certain deductions and credits. You know, that's often where the lowest tax bracket jumps up to a higher tax bracket. You know, smoothing your income out often can result in less lifetime tax. Early RRSP withdrawals also ties into deferring CPP and old age security as well. I think what somebody needs to do, on whether it's on their own or with a professional, is to try to come up with a sense of how much they're going to need to draw from their investments every year. Try to look at different scenarios of which accounts you might draw those investments from. And as Karin mentioned, sometimes it might seem good to have a low income and defer your RRSP withdrawals, and maybe, you know, pull money out of your TFSA, for example, early in retirement, so your income on your tax return is zero. But it can be very disadvantageous if the result is you've got less tax-free growth in your TFSA, you've got your RRSP as a ticking tax time bomb continuing to grow, and you may find yourself in a much higher tax bracket in your 70s and 80s having to deal with things like the old age security clawback that we talked about. And the other challenge, particularly if someone's got a lot of money in their RRSPs, if you think about a couple where they've got 2 tax returns to report their collective family income on, you know, if one of them dies at a young age, the survivor has all the resulting income on one tax return thereafter. And heaven forbid they both die at a young age. You know, RRSPs in particular, you know, more than half of those accounts can disappear to tax. So there's even estate planning implications of how you draw down your assets from retirement. But, you know, as you alluded to, David, there's no right or wrong answer. There's evaluating pros and cons. And again, whether someone does it on their own or with a professional, I think it's an important thing to consider as you approach retirement.
And Karin, as you approach retirement, how do you advise and coach your clients around this notion of a self-insurance sort of spending reserves, you know, spending bucket to withstand the inevitable market, you know, fluctuations as they're drawing down on that investment portfolio?
Yeah, so this is an interesting one because you know, the idea of having a potentially significant amount of money sitting in a cash equivalent savings account or GIC earning very, very low interest is, you know, maybe a tough sell. However, I still feel like sort of 3 to 5 years of someone's annual income needs in retirement, less any, you know, pensions that they have. It's imperative, you know, to keep for most people to keep a bucket that's a safe bucket. So just as an example, so let's say you needed $80,000 to fund your lifestyle needs, and you had $30,000 coming from after-tax pensions, and you needed about $50,000 more from savings. I would recommend keeping $150,000 to possibly even $250,000 in cash equivalent. Sort of this 3 to 5 year of, you know, of the annual income needs, you know, required after, you know, after the pensions that come into your bank account. Now, that's, you know, I have clients where they understand the theory behind it, but when they see, oh my God, you know, it's so inefficient, the markets are doing really well. However, you know, we have had, you know, over the years some pretty strong markets. I mean, I know they've been up and down, but what this strategy does is it becomes a safety net if markets, you know, do have, especially if, you know, you're in the early stages of retirement and you're still feeling a little precarious about this shift into, you know, drawing from your portfolio. Having those cash reserves, even if they're quote unquote inefficient, it can save you from and protect you really from the impulse to pull everything out of the market during a downturn, which that could really seriously affect your long-term retirement targets. So the idea of this cash reserve is to to save yourself from yourself.
Yeah, I think we're certainly on the same page with that. We're probably in the 2 to 3 year time horizon, but it's all circumstantial, and getting a good night's sleep is it's so important. As we wind down, I love this question that we got from our first cafe, so I want to pose it to you guys. The question is, if risk, so risk from, you know, risk of all sorts of risks, including investment risk and longevity, are totally variable and uncontrollable, why bother? What's the point of planning at all if we have no certainty?
It's a good question. You know, retirement planners often stress test for, you know, sequence of returns. So having poor investment returns early in retirement using something called Monte Carlo analysis to look at what happens if stocks are no good early on in retirement. But there's so many other variables that are beyond your control that, you know, things like long-term care cost or a child needing financial help or losing your job before you expect to retire, the risk of saving too much money and working too long, you know, arguably. And my mother, you know, worked hard and lived very frugally her whole life, and she was diagnosed with a terminal condition when she was 64, unfortunately, and she died a couple years ago when she was 66. I've had a couple of situations in my personal and professional life where I've had to take a step back actually and think, geez, I spend most of my day helping people make sure they've got enough money to live to age 95, but not everyone makes it there. So I think that it's caused me to even reconsider the whole retirement planning process. And I think that it's helpful because it can assess trajectory, but you need to balance saving for tomorrow and living for today as well.
Thank you. Karin, anything to add to that?
Yeah, just a little bit. And I think Jason said this before, that it's we can't predict the future, but to give somebody a ballpark of whether they're, in the ballpark or not is hugely helpful for most people. And also, I think the biggest value, as I was saying before, to the planning process, it's not so much about the numbers. It's about having an opportunity and the structure to think about your goals and objectives, to think about your money, to look at it, to make sure all your I's are dotted and T's are crossed, that you've got the estate plan in place. I mean, I've just lost and some family members, and left somebody, a family member has Alzheimer's, and it's just like a mucky mess in terms of what is happening financially, and to the family in terms of the dynamics around the illness and the death. So all of these kinds of things are part of a financial planning process, as well as, like I say, I think the biggest value is just, we're busy, we're running around, we're, to go through the discipline of looking at all aspects of your personal finances, and having those structured conversations, with yourself or with your spouse, depending on your single or your couple, of what you want your future to look like, what money means to you, how you want to, leave a legacy. Do you want to help your kids? Do you, can you help your kids? I mean, all of these kinds of conversations and scenarios get considered in the context of a comprehensive financial plan, which I'm sure you have the same experience, Jason. I've never had a client that has not said this is, a hugely valuable experience. Mm-hmm. And it might not be exactly what they thought it was going to be. They thought, oh, it's about the number. And actually, it's a whole lot more about, your life and how to make the best financial and, life-supporting decisions as possible.
Agreed.
And I agree with that, because I am a client of an advice-only financial planner, and my wife and I had a fantastic experience. It was a little bit of work pulling it all together, but it was more than worth that effort. So Karin and Jason, we've gone past the hour. We could keep going, and I'm sure many people would love us to keep going, because this is an incredibly important topic that is on the minds of so many of our clients and people that have dialed in today. Thank you both for your preparation for today, as well as your fantastic execution today. So thank you. Lisa, in the background, thank you for pulling this whole thing together and running our polls. We couldn't do it without your expertise on the webinar. Thank you to all the attendees for your interest in participating today. I encourage you to complete the survey as you log out of today's webinar. You'll be getting a link to a video of this webinar, I think as early as tomorrow, so feel free to forward that to friends and family members that might be interested. As I said earlier, we're structuring our next cafe to be sometime in the fall, and I have a strong sense it's going to be estate planning issues, but we look forward to your questions and comments in the survey. And finally, tomorrow we have another webinar, which is the monthly Intro to Steadyhand webinar. So if anybody's interested in knowing more about Steadyhand, our business practices and philosophy, how we manage money and work with clients, we encourage you to go to our website and register for that. So with that, again, Karin, Jason, thank you so much, and we wish everybody a great day.
Thanks, David. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, David. Appreciate it.